Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, 5 Best Practices for CRM Excellence. In this webinar, we will show you that whether you are implementing new technology or reimagining your current tools and processes, ensuring that your teams use them consistently and correctly is a key factor in your CRM success. So I do want to take a moment to do a few introductions. Today, you have 3 wonderful webinar hosts from SugarCRM. You have Jana Ferguson, Director of Customer Enablement. Jana, you can just wave. You have Bree Rowe, Director, SugarU. And my name is Sarah Friedlander Garcia, and I'm the Director of Content and Creative at SugarCRM. So now I would like to jump into our agenda and do a quick overview. We will go over the top 5 best practices to achieve CRM excellence and even look at some real life examples. And I know many of you must have webinar fatigue, so we have made this interactive with a few polls that will allow us to gauge you, the audience, about our 5 main topics as we go through the content. And then at the end, we'll give you a sneak peek into a free adoption offering available to all webinar participants in Sugar Club. And we will finish with some time for our Q&A. So now I would like to turn it over to Jana.
Thanks, Sarah. Awesome, everybody. So Bree and I are going to kind of go back and forth a little bit today, give you guys some of our best tips that we've seen other customers use over the years that have led to their success. Some of it is stuff we do ourselves here at Sugar. So we'll try and throw in some anecdotal evidence along the way. But to kind of kick things off, one of the most important things that you can do when you're rolling out either a new project or even just kind of giving some new life to the one that you already have is communication. It is so critical. And a lot of times we think, well, I already sent that out, or I already said that, or we've already gone over that. And the fact is that a lot of people probably weren't listening, if we're being honest. So you really do have to kind of over communicate and reiterate so much of what you're saying. So it could be timelines, it could be processes, it could just be like updates on what's going on or new things that you're rolling out. It could be new upgrades that we've done on our side that you guys are now able to take advantage of. Those are all things that really need to be continually communicated to your organization. And so that kind of ongoing continuous dissemination of information is really important. And it's also really important that you do that in different formats. So email is always one that's kind of ubiquitous in everything. We all get a zillion emails a day, which is also a reason why it can't be the only way that you communicate something out, because people can tend to tune out some of those things. Video is one that we've been using a lot ourselves that has been really successful. So keep those short. No one's gonna watch like 20 minutes. So even just like 3 to 5 minute snippets of like a little interview between 2 people or someone going over a particular process, that can be a really successful way and kind of catch people's attention in a little bit different way than they've maybe seen something before. And if you do have something like an intranet or a web page that your company uses to communicate information, that can be a great way. And even some informal channels like Slack or Teams or some of those more like chat-based types of things can be really great ways to just reiterate what you've already sent out officially to get people's attention a little bit more. Like I was saying with the video, you want to kind of break that information into bite-sized pieces. So if you tell everyone everything all at once, it's a little bit of information overload. So trickling that information out over time, reiterating the things that are most important, that kind of who, when, where type of information, that can be really successful. And just remember, you're going to have to say it over and over and over again. Chris Pennington, who's our Chief Customer Officer, he says all the time, reminds me constantly, you have to tell somebody something like 7 times before they remember. So that kind of repetition is really important, because every time you say you feel like, oh, I've already sent this message 10 times, there's somebody who's reading it for the first time and just now kind of picking up on what you've been sending out. So that can be a really great way to just continue to build that momentum, and also use different messengers. So something we did recently, we actually did a re-implementation ourselves because we've changed a lot in the past couple of years, and I ended up being that messenger somehow. And so we had kind of the same message coming from Craig, our CEO, from myself, from Chris, from different managers within the organization. And that's just making sure that people hear that over time. So yeah, that's our first step. So I think our next slide is going to be a poll to get y'all's thoughts. So how does your company communicate change?
So I'm just launching this poll right now so we can give everyone a few minutes to go and vote. This is interesting, Jana and Bree. It seems like email is trumping everything. And then there's also all.
All, yeah.
Someone also said company meeting, which we did not have as in there as an option. That's another good one. Okay, give a few more minutes or a few more seconds, and then I'll wrap it up. It looks like it's about 82% of everyone has voted, so I'll keep it open for 10 more seconds, and then we have one minute if there's any last minute stragglers that want to cast their vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'll just share out the results because that's kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, definitely email is like the kind of end all be all of communication, I feel like, in the workplace. Yeah. But definitely varying those different types of messages and places that can live. The intranet one is an interesting concept because if you don't really have that within your company, or it's not something that people reference, then it's less effective. But if you do have some sort of like perpetual place that information can live, that can be really helpful because then you can kind of link people back to that place over and over and over again so that it's not just living within that email message or that meeting that, yes, it got recorded, but maybe no one's going to go back and watch it kind of thing. So having some sort of like everlasting place for that information to live can be really useful as well.
Yeah, it becomes a reference point, somewhere that people know to go when they need information, which is important.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and talk about tailoring your tech to your processes. And a big piece of this, as you see on the screen, is the people technology or people process technology framework. And it's really important to balance these components to maintain good relationships between them all to ensure that your business is running efficiently. So, you know, a lot of organizations look to technology to solve their biggest challenges. But a lot of times they find that the technology is only as good as the people and processes that are actually using it. So some of the ways that you can ensure that your technology is supporting your people and processes are to consider how your users use the tools that they have in place currently. So what are the current processes? How are they, you know, how's a salesperson closing a deal? How does a customer service rep open a case or update a case? What does that look like to the customer once that's done? So really keying into how your users in all the different roles that are going to be using the tool, how they go about their day, what do their processes look like? You want to speak to the hearts and minds of your users, and that's really going to help you to drive change. So keep in mind with new tools, you know, sometimes there's a bit of hesitation about transitioning to something new or even sometimes new processes. So make sure that you really highlight the ways in which these changes are going to make their lives easier. And this is also a good time to kind of take a look at what's working, what's not working, kind of keeping in mind how things can be improved. The other key is to build the tool into the daily process of your users. So the more that people understand, you know, they need to understand how it's going to impact their day. what are their day-to-day roles and activities going to look like once they start using this tool. So again, keeping in mind how you can make it easier on them, and also making sure that they need to use it. So if it's a tool that they need to heavily rely on, if it's going to be something that they know that management is going to be looking at to kind of ensure that people are actually going in and completing, you know, the processes or fields, whatever it may be that others are looking at, you want to make sure that it's something that they need to rely on. This really helps to kind of drive efficiency and kind of increase overall adoption, because if it's something that they know that others are relying on, they're going to be more prone to actually use it and make sure that they're being a part of the greater overall team who's contributing to using the tool like the rest of the company should be. Also tailoring the technology to support your processes. So, you know, you've obviously got the people who need to use it, you've got the underlying technology, but you need to make sure that the processes that you have are, you know, fitting into that technology. So there's you know, typically a lot of companies have a number of processes. And so you want to kind of focus in and highlight the ones, at least for initial launch, that are most important, because sometimes too much too soon can overwhelm people. And then that will compromise the efficiency of the CRM or the tool that you're using. So start with the necessities that you know you need to kind of get in there, and then you can build from there. And then also make sure that you're defining and communicating clear processes. You know, make sure that people understand exactly how they're supposed to go in and, you know, use the tool, or what fields they need to be populating with what information. And there's a lot of tools that are available to do that from within the application itself, but just making sure to reference those and have good training materials to support that. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just kind of making sure that you've got that all set, and that will help kind of the technology piece to shine, because people are using it efficiently. Lastly, identify where direct access can be leveraged. So just kind of making sure, again, that you're keeping all three of these different components in balance and that they're all working together. Because just like riding a tricycle, you know, you've got three wheels. If one of those wheels isn't working efficiently, then, you know, you're going to be slightly out of balance. So make sure that you keep them all in balance, you know, check into them on a frequent basis. And one example that we have on the slide there is, you know, using reports or dashboards in your team meetings. I know that meetings, you know, was kind of one of the pieces that we talked about in the poll in terms of communication, and showing the company that you're using those reports or dashboards in a meeting is it's a pretty clear message to say, hey everyone, this is important. This is where we're leveraging this to show you how the company is performing. You know, that says a lot in terms of proving that you know, you guys have put a lot into the tool, and that everybody should be utilizing it and making it as best as it can be. So those are just kind of some ways that you can, again, kind of tailor your tech to your processes. And then I think we've got another poll to see how everyone is doing this.
Yeah, baking the usage into your day-to-day is so important. Like whenever I talk to customers that are like doing awesome in terms of adoption, the number one thing they say is like, there's no other way to do your job than to use this tool. And like that's made such a huge difference for people.
Definitely.
Really so interesting. It's leaning towards no.
No, interesting. I'd be curious if people could put into the chat where they feel like there's the most imbalance, or what piece is not where it should be.
Yeah.
Wow. Big lean towards no.
Got a silent group here. If you want to add into the chat just to give us a little bit more details about where you're seeing that no.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting for us to see.
I'd say I'm not entirely surprised that it's leaning towards no. It's so hard to strike that balance, and it can be really challenging. It requires a lot of alignment within your entire organization, especially if you have multiple departments or multiple teams using the same tool, because they may want to do things differently.
Right.
And if you don't have necessarily a large enough organization to have someone kind of dedicated to paying attention to those things, they can get out of whack pretty quickly. So it's good to kind of just set like maybe like a quarterly check-in or something like that to kind of assess and see like where are some small tweaks that we can make here or there that might make a big difference for your users.
Mhm.
We had a couple people write in. I'll just read them out. It's just really interesting. Processes are not well supported by technology. Another person said process. And then our sales team is not at all interested in CRM. They see it as a burden with no added value for them. People resist technological change in general. Our company has great retention, but this also means that we have a large number of folks who have been at the company for a long time. And then teams also have separate trackers and are more resistant to changing that process to make sure all relevant information is in the CRM. And then another, too many tools, no coherent workflows, teams work differently and therefore don't know what the others are doing. So
Yeah.
a lot of good feedback there.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, it really does take that like cross-functional like team and organization to kind of take a step back and look at it from a bird's eye level and say like, okay, this team's doing this team's doing that. How can we kind of marry things together and make everyone work more efficiently? And so much of it, and I think this kind of comes through in the comments, is dependent on your organizational structure. So if your teams are very independent from one another and have sort of autonomy between themselves, that's a whole different culture than, you know, people who are all like one big system together. And all of that presents different challenges that you have to kind of tackle piecemeal and figure out what's going to work and then try and implement that over time. And it does take a lot of time.
And commitment too. I think that sometimes people get worn down and the end result is worth the persistence. I'll say that.
Yeah, it is. Cool. So our next tip that we have is the key role of the manager. So when we say managers in this context, we're referring to kind of your frontline managers. So maybe that first tier above your individual contributors who are managing either smaller teams or are part of larger organizations. This is such a critical role in helping with the success of your rollout. So they're sort of in this really interesting middle ground between individual contributors, their team members, and higher organizational structure. And so they really have a unique role in which they can provide feedback back and forth between those two stakeholders, because sometimes that gap can get pretty wide pretty quick. And so it's important that people who are making the decisions about how your tools are implemented, what your processes are, they understand what the true day-to-day is like for the individual people who are performing those tasks or those actions. And those managers are a great way to facilitate that communication back and forth. And they're also in a unique position to identify gaps that other people may not see. So, you know, your CRM admin may have like a really cool idea of like something new that they could change in the system or roll out that they think is going to be great, but they're missing some piece of information as to like how those users are actually going to use that or how it's going to be practical to them. And those managers can see that like right away and be able to identify that and kind of address that before it all gets pushed out and then everyone's like, freaking out. So, you know, being able to communicate benefits of new features or new processes, easing those transitions, they play a huge role in training. Because if you think about, you know, new team members who are coming on as individual sales reps or individual marketers or support staff, most likely those people are being trained by their manager. And so having that accountability factor of making sure their team members are following the correct processes or entering information the way that they're supposed to, using the tools that they're supposed to in the way that they should be, and coaching the correct behavior. They're also really important in modeling proper usage. So you want to make sure they're informed and educated on what they should be doing so that they can model that for their team members, and also, you know, incentivize them in some way potentially to, you know, have clean data or follow particular procedures to where everything's logged the way it should be. So they really do have a really key role in making sure that things are successful. And so that means they also need to be supported so that they have the information they need, they have the tools that they need to instruct their teams. So that might be resources or reference materials that they can go to. And then also just making sure that they have a positive view of the system, because if they're naysayers or like, oh, don't worry, just put it in an Excel file, like that's not going to help anybody's cause. So making sure that they have that positive view of the project or the solution, and they support it, they're a really key group to focus on if you are trying to make changes or roll out a new system. Definitely don't forget about them. We have a really great ebook. You can find it in Sugar Club. I think if you search Managing Through Change, it should come up. That it talks specifically about that manager role. So definitely check that out as well.
And I'll open up the next poll.
So does your organization leverage managers to communicate change? And again, here we're talking that kind of frontline manager role.
Well, this is pretty positive. It is yes.
Yeah,
That's good.
that is good.
Give it a few more. Another 10, 15 seconds. That's pretty good. It's about 80-20, it feels like.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go close this poll and then I'm going to share the results just for a minute.
Awesome. I would say for anyone who isn't looking to that role, definitely start thinking about how you can incorporate them more into your decisions or rollout plans or communication plans, because they can be really helpful in making sure that people are doing what they need to do or getting the information that they need.
Yeah, keep them in mind as agents of change, essentially.
Yeah,
sure. All right, speaking about go live is just the beginning. As a trainer, this obviously speaks to my interest in the importance of, making sure that, everybody, it's like you've got this whole launch that everybody's gearing up towards, right? And you get to that point where you go live and then everybody takes a big sigh of relief, like, all right, you made it, you've launched. And then, you have to make sure that you keep that momentum going. You have to make sure that you're, supporting the users as they get into the system. I think that there's something to be said for doing training beforehand so that people know what to anticipate and how to use the system. But it's when they actually get in and start using it, that's when it's most crucial to ensure their success. So make sure in those weeks, months, quarters that may follow the actual launch that you are touching base with them on a regular basis to ensure that they are getting what they need from the system, that they know how to use it. If they're stuck at some point, you've got someone there to kind of help ensure that they have what they need. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be something super formal. We've seen it with customers that office hours are a great way to make sure that you have someone there so you can set a regular cadence of, could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour on a weekly basis, to where you have a couple of subject matter experts or super users available to kind of just be online. You can have people drop in and ask questions. It's a smaller group. People tend to be a little bit more comfortable in that type of setting. So that's one option. Another would be that if you've got super users within the different groups or orgs at your business, making sure that the other employees that are part of those groups know who those individuals are. It's important to make sure that they know who within their team or org they can reach out to if they have questions. The last thing you want is someone kind of struggling silently on their own, because it's, you want to make sure that you can turn that around as fast as possible. And sometimes someone's more comfortable going to a colleague to ask those questions than they would be to, their manager or director. So having someone that they know is noted as a subject matter expert or super user within their team is important. Also keep in mind new hire training. So, Jana mentioned how that's important for managers, obviously, to know, but it's something as a whole to kind of think about and keep in mind. You may have great retention, and you may have people who are coming and going or switching roles within the company. So making sure that you have content or training that different teams can utilize is important, not only for initial training, but also for continuous training, or those times when you have to onboard someone who's new to the company or someone who's taken on a new role, making sure that they have good resources and individuals to reach out to kind of get them up to speed on how they'll be using the application. The other thing that I want to talk about that I think is important, just real quick before we move on to the poll, no, it's okay, is to make sure that you have a kind of number of different resources available. So there are people that learn well via video. There are people that want that, on the spot, I need a quick guide or reference to kind of look at to help me through this question I have. So making sure you have variation is important too. Accepting feedback, there's always room for improvement. Listen to what your users are telling you in terms of where they may be getting stuck or things that aren't working quite the way that they think they should be. Take it with a grain of salt, but don't completely dismiss it, because they are the ones that you need to adopt the system. And though you can't please everyone, it is important, if you're hearing the same things over and over again, to kind of keep those in mind. And then iteration is obviously important. Don't let your CRM get stale. Take the time to evaluate what's working and what's not, and don't be scared to make changes. Now we can do the poll.
I waited extra long there.
No, that's totally fine. So, curious to see how you all feel your company does in terms of how often you're training. What does that cadence look like? Is it something that's ongoing on all the time? Is it monthly, quarterly, yearly? Okay, looks like ongoing is actually winning, which is great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing. That's really good.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where, like, depending on the topic, it can kind of be reinforced at different intervals, I guess. Yeah. So there may be some things that you want to kind of continually remind people of and keep top of mind and make sure people know exactly what to do. And then there's other things that maybe are less common tasks or only come up seasonally or something like that, and you can do that less often.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It looks like ongoing and quarterly, which is great. Those are good cadences.
Yeah.
I'm going to close the poll so we can all take a look at the results. Pretty good.
Well done. Yeah, that's great.
All right. So our last tip for today is fostering peer engagement. And Bree hinted at this a little bit in the last topic, but really those peer-to-peer networks and informal collaboration between your team members is so important. And this is one that has kind of taken a little bit of a twist in the past couple of years, because there's probably more people working remotely than ever have before. And so a lot of that kind of like water cooler conversation, or like leaning over to the person next to you and being like, hey, I'm not really sure how to do this. Do you know? Like, those conversations are not as easily facilitated anymore. And so, if you're not in an office or you are home, you're kind of essentially by yourself in a lot of ways, having those kind of chit chat type of things, while there are chat tools and things like that, they're probably not happening as frequently as they would be, because you don't like notice something walking by somebody's desk or something like that. And so making sure that even though those are informal networks or informal ways of collaborating, that we are creating formal ways to foster that. So that might be making sure there are dedicated Slack channels or Teams channels that people can go to ask questions about CRM or about a particular project or a way of doing something, because we've seen over time that learning from your coworkers is far more effective than any type of formalized training that people get. And so making sure that those conversations don't just wither and die is really important. So that might be something like having like a mentor or a buddy system, so people know who to go to, having those subject matter experts, creating those channels that people can look to, kind of like an ask me anything type of situation, to where it is informal. There's sort of like no bad question type of thing, and that can make sure that people are, you know, when they are trying, they're actually getting the answers that they need to do better. And so having those internal champions that you've identified that can support those internal networks is really critical. It could be people volunteer. It could be they sort of just become a parent out of everyday usage. You're like, oh, Chad knows what he's talking about. We should make Chad a champion, and like, you know, make sure everybody knows if they have a question, they can go to him, and also that he's on board with answering those questions as they come his way. So finding out who those folks are internally that you can kind of promote and give them a little bit more voice can be really great. It makes people feel good as, you know, someone who's looked to as an expert in their role. So if you do have any type of like employee recognition program or anything like that, that's a great way to kind of give those people a little bit of a boost, and then also get something in return by having them help you field questions or help others adopt your tools and processes more effectively. And then kind of like I was saying before, creating a space for that engagement, especially with if you do have a large number of remote workers, that can be really important. So using those different chat tools, whatever is kind of ubiquitous within your company, you want to go with that. Any team sites that you may have, think about, you know, how people communicate naturally within your organization and really amp up the volume on those channels, because that's going to be really helpful in making sure that those conversations continue, especially if people aren't all together. So
Our last.
Okay, I know the last poll.
cool. So what channels do you guys use to promote peer engagement? And if there are any that we don't have listed that are really effective for you, definitely feel free to pop those in the chat as well.
It's pretty close.
This is interesting. I can't even tell which one's going to be the winner.
Yeah, well, we also made it like multi-select, so.
That's true as well.
Looks like email and chat are leading. It's pretty close though between the first three.
And team meetings too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Buddy system, that's only 4%.
Yeah, that might be a little, I don't know, could be a little bit more difficult, I guess, based on whether people are in offices or, I mean, remote. I guess chat would be a way to utilize that potentially.
That's interesting. You know, this question, if we would have posed it 2 years ago, the results could have been very different.
Yeah.
So true.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Awesome. So it is like pretty even. I think that's great. It speaks to like people having multiple ways of communicating with one another. You know, it can be hard sometimes to not feel a little bit isolated. I think everyone's like pretty well adjusted at this point, but you know, it was definitely challenging up front, and it's been interesting to see how this has evolved over the past couple of years as well.
Definitely.
So the last thing before we get to Q&A, we wanted to make sure everyone here on the webinar is aware of our Grow Adoption Framework. This is something that we launched in Sugar Club mid last year. There are a ton of resources in it. So basically, it's a framework to help you kind of move through the different stages of adoption with your tools and processes, whatever they may be. So it's not just CRM specific. You could use this for any type of tool or implementation. And so it kind of moves through different stages. Even if you've had your existing implementation for a long time, check out the Get Started stage. There could be some good tidbits in there for you to either, you know, launch a new feature or just kind of get a little bit of a refresh on what you may have going on. So there's guides and workbooks at each stage that'll help you. We've also curated lots of other resources from around sugar, so things other teams have created, just different ebooks or infographics, anything like that that we think would be helpful. Those are all curated within the framework. And then Bree's also created some specific learning plans to help support your users on our different tools at different stages of that process. So definitely check that out. It's totally free. You would just log into Sugar Club to download anything, and we would love for you guys to check it out.
Okay, with that, I do want to turn it over to Q&A. Okay, the first question I have is, what are your recommendations for creating a communication plan?
Yeah, so this is one that you probably want to think about, either whether it's a new go live or you're just like communicating some new change or new feature or new update that you've made. Definitely keep your audience front of mind. So that whole like what's in it for me evaluation, like think about your different user types, who's actually going to use that particular feature or tool, and like literally sit down and list out like what is the benefit that this person will gain out of this, and use that to help tailor some of your messaging. And then also keep in mind sort of a now, next, later mindset. So like we talked about earlier, having that continuous stream of communication. Think about, you know, pacing that, what's most important for people to know right now, what is upcoming, and then what's further down the road that maybe we want to plan for, but not necessarily reveal to them or talk about just yet. And kind of use that to pace that. We do have a template in that Grow framework that I was talking about that can help with that in the Get Started workbook. So definitely check that out. And yeah, that would be my tips.
And I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, you go. I was going to go down to the next question.
I was going to say just one thing to add is don't be afraid to think outside the box. I think that we have a tendency to get comfortable in our forms of communication when it comes to the broader company, and, you know, find ways to have fun with it, find ways to make it different, to try and really grab their attention. I think that there's a lot to be said about making it fun and interesting, and you know, not falling into your natural rhythms of communication. That's all out there.
When we like did our re-implementation and we rolled stuff out, we created like a news program.
Yeah,
Which was really just me, but it was fun, and people like really liked it. We got a lot of good feedback on it. So, you know, be silly, don't take it too seriously. Like, you know, if you can make it fresh and exciting, it catches people's attention and they're more likely to listen. So
right.
That's a good one. And speaking as, you know, somebody that was the receiver of a lot of those videos on the training as we rolled out our new system, it was fun and interesting to watch. So I think, you know, just making it interesting and engaging where somebody just doesn't see it in its archive, but actually clicks and watches, that's the end goal.
Yeah. And kind of one of the advantages to that is a lot of times if you put it in a video, you can get view counts on it. So you know how many people watched it. You don't really know how many people read the email. So there are some advantages to mixing it up a little bit too.
Definitely.
That's a good note. So this question came in earlier. It's a little bit technical, but is it possible to show external data sources in Sugar, for example, in dashlets or in the side pane? And if yes, what's the best way to incorporate them into Sugar? I think this came in regarding either the first or second best practice we covered.
I would say that it depends on exactly what you're trying to pull in. There are certainly options there, and there's a lot more tools today that will allow you to do that. So depending on exactly what you're looking for, that may be something we can take more directly offline. But the short answer I would say is yes. It's just a matter of kind of trying to understand exactly what you're trying to pull in and in what format, but there are ways to have it done. So we've seen it done before. It's just a matter of how and what you're looking for.
And if you are a current Sugar customer, reach out to your customer success manager. They'll be able to go over this with you and go through a number of options, and they'll really understand what you're trying to achieve for your specific business.
Exactly. Yeah.
Next question, what are your suggestions for encouraging user compliance?
Ooh.
There's a lot of different methods there. Yeah.
It depends on if you want to use the carrot or the stick.
Yes.
Or a combination of both. So there's definitely a reporting aspect. I think, you know, making it clear that you're watching and paying attention is helpful. And, you want to strike a balance of like, still having like a positive attitude and mindset towards things. But even things as simple as like a data discrepancy report or something like that. Like if you have a process in place that requires all contacts to have X, Y, and Z information, just running a report of contacts that are missing that information and having that sent to your customer success team or whomever on a regular basis, that can be helpful in just making people more observant of the fact that something may be amiss. There's also things you can do in terms of like incentivizing users. So you can run little contests or, kind of like raffles or something like that each quarter for who's being the most successful. So there's different ways you can approach it. I think having that balance between accountability and then like fun and reward is probably the most successful, because if you lean too far one way or the other, then it either gets kind of this like negative, like out to get you sort of attitude, or it's like, well, I don't care about a gift card, whatever. Like,
Right.
So you kind of have to have a little bit of both, I think.
Agreed. I've seen companies tie it to MBOs and sales. If you don't have certain fields filled out, then certain opportunities won't move to the next phase or be closed by finance. So there's a lot of different methodologies, but agree that there's a balance there and that you don't want to go too far you don't want to be too stick heavy. I'll say that. You want to make sure that there's some rewards there as well.
Here's another one. This is a long one. Oh, okay. So what is the best way for a firm that doesn't use CRM right now to identify all the processes where improvement can occur as a result of CRM implementation? It seems as though the change to an organization's operating environment could be so vast that it would be very hard to scope out all the changes that will occur as a result of automated processes and reporting.
Yeah, that's true. So I think it's something, it will take a while. If you don't have a CRM system in place, or it's something that you're looking to do, I think I would definitely start with like, what are you doing now? Like, what are the different ways that people are doing things? Because you may find that even like people within the same role have sort of created their own way of tracking or doing something, and some might be more successful than others. And then I think probably the next step from there, once you've kind of figured out like what's everyone doing and what's working and what's not, then like looking at how that would map to sort of a standard CRM tool without any like customizations or anything added, and then figure out kind of where the holes are. That would be my advice to start with, and just know it is going to be a process. Like, it's going to take some time, but I think it's probably definitely well worth it, because when you have different systems or different piecemeal ways of doing things, you're not all in the same boat rowing the same direction, and so you'll definitely see some efficiency improvements by taking the time to do that.
Well, and I think too, as part of that process, the benefit is not only understanding what will make sense or translate to the CRM, but also I think having an audit of, kind of to Jana's point of what's going on. And sometimes there are processes that continue just because they always existed and they may no longer make sense, or they may not be the most efficient way to do it. So figuring out what all those processes are, which may take time, and then prioritization too, I think is key. Kind of going back to what I had mentioned about the people, process, technology, kind of prioritizing those that are must-haves in the CRM for the very beginning, and then kind of finding ways to implement in phases potentially, or, just trying not to overwhelm everyone at the very beginning.
We see that very often with our services team, is they're doing implementations, especially, very large ones. If you're a large organization, they're taking that in phases. And so, knowing that you don't have to eat the whole elephant in one bite, that whole analogy, look at where your true pain points are, what's like really not working, and address those first. And then continually iterate and improve, because you may find that like as you chip away at one thing, it either resolves a bunch of other things on its own, or it sort of like makes you go, maybe we aren't doing that the way we should be. And it kind of creates the snowball effect of other changes that'll be beneficial. So
next question. How do you maintain rollout confidence when there's hesitancy to adopt in the first place?
You need a lot of cheerleaders.
Cheerleaders and persistence.
Yeah, persistence. You have to put on a brave face, even when in the, behind closed doors, you're like, oh gosh, what are we gonna do? Know that it's gonna be an uphill battle a lot of times, and just kind of prepare for that. The more you can have those internal champions, and the why behind things is, I find, really critical. Because a lot of times what can happen, especially if people aren't really paying attention to the communications that are coming out, is that they feel like, well, this is just management or whomever making this decision. Nobody's listened to what I have to say, and I'm just gonna have to do this. It's gonna be a pain. So that can create that sort of like negative talk spiral. So, communicating the why behind what is happening, and also like making sure that you're clear that you have, assuming that you have taken into account feedback from actual users. So like, maybe I wasn't on the user council, but my coworker who sits right next to me was. And so by knowing that, I have more confidence in the fact that our voice, as whatever our role is, has been heard. And so, being really clear about that and explaining, the benefits is really critical. But just know you're going to need a lot of internal cheerleaders, and having that positive attitude is everything.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Jana just said. And persistence is key. As she said, it's an uphill battle, but you really truly have to stick with it. And as you build up those internal cheerleaders, they'll slowly start to build on themselves. And it may be a slow trickle, but if you keep with it and you keep finding those individuals that do see the benefit, they'll continue to pass that message along. And keep in mind, the managers are key. Getting the buy-in from them is sometimes difficult, just as it is with users, but you have to stick with it, show them the benefits, show them why it's going to impact them in a positive way, and really continue to highlight and kind of drive those factors so that they come around.
Definitely keep your eyes and ears open for those internal cheerleaders, because they will be out there. Like sometimes they're kind of hiding, like you don't notice them at first, but it might be like someone who was in user testing that was like, oh, I really love that feature. You better write their name down and then send an email, amplify their voice in some kind of way. And so, always having that like radar tuned in to like who has something good to say, and then amplify those people.
And the other thing I'll say, we talked about using team meetings as a way to kind of reinforce or get the message across to all the individual teams. Giving those managers or team leads points to talk about, kind of giving them a script to go off of, is important too, because sometimes if you leave it up to them, they may not be relaying kind of what you're hoping for, or if they don't have enough of those positive points to talk about, there's room there obviously for them to make it their own. But I think giving them something to reference or use with their teams is also super helpful.
I'll power through the next couple of questions as we only have a couple of minutes left. What courses do you recommend for end users?
Oh, good question. So we do have, for all the different products on Sugar Club, in the Learn area, there is under the e-learning, there's a couple places. So there's under the e-learning, we have a whole group for end users, and that is all end user courseware. We have a lot of getting started courses. We have content that's more, in depth, I guess you could say, for the courses. We also have a whole catalog of how-to videos in the quick video section of Learn. So those are both good areas. I would definitely suggest starting with the e-learning courses, because for end users, it is going to give them kind of more prescriptive training. But we do have a whole section there with getting started courseware for our products. So highly suggest those.
And what do you do if your managers are not supportive of your implementation?
Yeah, that can be really tricky. So I would say definitely listen to them. Have some one-on-ones to find out, why there's some hesitancy or some kind of negative attitudes, whatever it may be, and really think about what it is that they have to say. And, some people are just negative to be negative, but a lot of times there may be like small grievances that can very easily be resolved, and a lot of times pretty quickly. So see if there are some of those kind of low-hanging fruit type things that you could make some quick changes to that would improve, a system or a process and help to kind of, get them back on board. But just involve them in the process. Make sure that they feel like they have a voice and it's not just they're getting mandated to do X, Y, or Z from above. Because the more collaborative that can be, the more positive it's going to be, and you may actually learn a lot from them that you didn't realize before.
Those are all the questions that came through. I think I need to take a breath after that. That was fantastic. So I did at this moment just want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Bree. I think this content was very well received, and for myself, it just runs these webinars. I learned a lot as well, so that's always a nice benefit. And thank you everyone for coming, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.